insecurities than the people that we're dealing with, but also know that like you don't have to, like, again, like the role in the wedding can be very small or very large. You don't have to, like, you don't have to be Mashiach in every one of these cases, right? Like you can only bite off what you can chew. And when, tefasta merula tefasta. So like, that's also important to keep in mind here. In terms, let me keep going. So again, so this is still on the premarital side. So some couples really want to get very detailed in designing their wedding and like making every element of it very clear.
I want to add one thing before designing the wedding. Oh, you have premarital counseling. I'm sorry. What did that mean, premarital counseling?
So what it means, when I did weddings, I would have at least 4, assuming people were in my community, I would have at least 4 sessions with them. And one of them was dedicated exclusively to marital counseling issues. So I'll show you what that means. So I have 2 documents that are part of this presentation, so you'll get it. You can give them. One is a 10 important questions to have discussed before getting married. It's not your job to like necessarily sit down and have that conversation, facilitate the conversation around these questions, but it is super important that that they get this list and that they talk about this list. These are like really basic and really important things that everybody should talk about before marriage. They don't have answers to all these questions before marriage, but they should talk about these things before marriage. Everything from expectations about children, expectations about religious background, beliefs, work and money. Do we have a clear sense of where people are coming from? How do we understand gender roles? Have we fully disclosed our health histories, physical and mental? 1 second. Is each partner affectionate and expressive to the degree that the other expects? Can we comfortably, and openly discuss our sexual needs, preferences, and fears? What do we expect in terms of relationships with each other's family of origin? Do we like each other's friends? How do we feel about each other's friends? Do we enjoy some of the same leisure recreational activities? How do we deal with conflict as our styles of communication? So these questions can bring up everything and anything, but they're really important that couples at least put on the table and at least start talking about. So this is something that I'd probably send them ahead of time, and I would probably even look to talk about some of these things with them. Wouldn't talk all of them, but like in that one session, I would want to pick a couple of these things and maybe highlight and facilitate a bit of a conversation, again, depending on how well I know them and things like that. But it's good to start putting these things in the air about how they're thinking about this, these kinds of things, especially if this is a couple you're going to have an ongoing relationship with. Because if you are, like, the more that you can be a resource for them, and especially during this very important time, right, the more you can really help them over the long run. So this is one piece of the sort of premarital pastoral counseling session. The other one is this great piece on marital communication. It's called John Gottman's 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse. So it talks about 4 dimensions of the relationship that when they're there are like bad signs. And when they're all together, like, it's a real problem. So these are criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. And again, it's very simplistic in the way he lays things out, but it's also really good because these things are like the 4 horsemen. Like if they're there, like stuff's can be really hard and very difficult. And people need to be aware of them and be able to name them and be able to start thinking about what does it mean to deal with them. It's important, again, that couples get the chance to start like putting these kinds of things out in the air and being able to communicate about like basic aspects of how people relate to each other in the context of a relationship is super duper important. So I would spend the whole meeting with just going over the last that and this piece here. Yep.
So I'm sorry. I want to add one thing on the John Gottmans. I just want to add one thing. If one of the two expresses problems of abuse, you have to be ready, not automatic because you don't even know, but when you find out, you got to automatically to tell, it's usually her, but could be him, to walk away. And you have to then be ready to go with her to her parents or to whoever. I'm only talking about certain people, but nonetheless, you have to stand by the individual. So you got to be ready for that.
Yeah, and, I mean, as somebody who deals with, again, the bad side of all this, everything is there on entry, right? If people just can't always identify it or have done digging enough. which means if there's real problems, like you're going to see it, and you do have and Rav Lenny's absolutely correct, you have a responsibility to raise it, particularly, I mean, abuse, absolutely, but it doesn't always have to be straight up abuse. That may not make its way into your engagement with them. But if you're seeing behavior from like the chatan or the kala that looks like weird or manipulative, or something's like going on there, like you need to be able to name it, because the other party may not be able to recognize it for what it is, and it's important to be able to raise it. I mean, it could save lives. I mean, literally. And look, I mean, we've talked about at the IPT putting together a list of like things to look for, that like for a potential spouse to be able to have a checklist so they can look at their partner and try to determine if this person is abusive or crazy or not. It's not so easy to come up with such a thing, but people need to be sensitive to this on entry. And you need to know, like, how long have they known each other? If they only know each other for like a very short period of time, are there red flags? Like, and it's your job on some level to be aware of that and to raise them. So
I want to add one, and so now I have to add this other part, which you don't need to respond to. But yeah, here's another thing. If you end up having religious people that have turned to you for all sorts of reasons, maybe they think you're religious. That was kind of a joke, but anyway, they have turned to you, and you're going to be the rabbi. I'm talking about certain. You have to make sure that if the man is naive, that he's going to have to learn certain things. And if she's naive, that she's going to have to learn a number of things. You have to be worried with the guy about the rape of the wedding night. You have to be really concerned about that. Those are real possibilities. And if you're ready for it, but this is what I always did. I always made sure that the woman, I would tell the woman that I believe in birth control generally. I mean, if you have an older woman and the clock is ticking, maybe that's something else. But and therefore I acted differently. And I would give heterim for birth control, not reactively, but pre-reactively. Because actually, fine, I'm ready to defend that. Turns out I ended up getting a lot more from her couples coming, because I couldn't get that anywhere else. That's just a testimony, but it's really important to be ready for that too.
Right. I mean, hopefully, as part of a chatan and kala classes, they're getting the sex ed piece, particularly particularly the halacha, which is about halacha is more permissive about marital sexual acts than most people realize. Questions of who initiates, and as Rav Lenny said, right, being aware of things like marital rape, which is a very, very real problem, and recognizing what boundaries and consent and all that is fundamentally necessary. So again, like that's potentially all part of this, along with Taharat HaMishpacha, along with everything else here. And you don't have to have all the answers, but you want to have like people that you could potentially direct them to, who can help with some of this, with some of this stuff. Like if somebody is from and you're not like genuinely from, and you're not doing all those other pieces, like you need to make sure that they are happening. Like, again, it's tough when people are sort of betwixt and between religiously, but like if they're from, like you want to do everything you can to make sure these pieces are happening. We're still on the premarital side, meaning the things you have to do before the day of. So these are, I think, the main things that you kind of have to deal with beforehand. We didn't even talk about design. Okay, so there are some couples that want every aspect of their wedding designed creatively, and it can get to be a real pain. But it often means, especially with couples who aren't so religious, that you do have to go over every detail of the wedding. You have to explain what's involved and what's going on. And I would often do a session just on that. Like, we're going to walk through this, every detail, and work out like what needs to be done, how things can be done. And some couples come in, like every step, they want to like rethink how to do it. And you sit there with them and try to work through what's possible and what's not. So that's often a dimension of this. Again, maybe in Israel less so. I definitely less so in Israel, but in Chul it depends, like on the situation. But going back to the things you have to have like established beforehand. So again, you have to review the ceremony in the kibbudim. Like you have to kind of have this all figured out. And usually requires like a long checklist. Who are your witnesses for Tanayim? If you're doing Tanayim, you don't have to do Tanayim. I don't prefer doing Tanayim, but some people like to do it just to honor more people. It obviously doesn't have to be done. For Ketubah, for Kedushin, for Yichud, for Sheva Brachas. And you need alternates, like you need to have other people as backups for all of these, not for all of them, but you need to have you need to have backups for Adim, for the main things, and backups for Sheva Brachas.
Don't delay a wedding except for grandparents. If a certain aid is not.
Oh yeah. Not at
Don't
all.
delay it. Don't delay it. We'll give them another covenant. So they'll have a covenant to bris. Something else.
Absolutely. Like the show has to go on when it comes to weddings. Like you don't play, you just find a way to keep it moving. So, okay, all the kibbudim, and it's important that they're really figured out like ahead of time, and you have it all, and they'll hem and haw, and they don't know, and they want to honor Uncle Shmuley and their best friend Joe, and you have to like, carefully work that out. You do not want to go to a wedding without having those, like that list. Like that's just not putting yourself in a good position. In terms of the ring, right? Again, the main things are that it has to be owned by the Chatan, and it ideally should be unadorned. Again, there are exceptions. We obviously don't want rings with, precious stones in it, but there are sometimes cases where the ring has engravings, or the ring is like a dual metal ring, and those are usually fine. But ideally, you just want to tell them to use something that's unadorned. But the bigger issue is being owned by the chassan. So again, we're not going to unpack all this, but just know it does where it matters, right? So halachically is like if they're using like a borrowed or a gifted ring, that gets more complicated. If it's like, depending on where the ring is coming from, is it his parents, is it her parents? Because in truth, if it's a gift, it's not clear that gifted rings work, because the people who give the ring may not really have in mind to give it, because they think it's just being used for the wedding, and they don't really think like completely that they're being maknet to the person that they're giving it to. So for example, there's like a whole host of tshuvas about if the kala has a ring, that we don't really trust her to be maknet fully to the husband because she's getting it back again. And the same thing is true with her parents, and potentially even with his parents. So it gets more complicated. It's not that you can resolve these issues, but you really want to establish that it's his. And ideally, if he's getting it from somebody else, he should pay money for it, even a token amount, it makes it easier halachically than having to deal with the matana or matana min al-hachs or any of that kind of stuff. Adim, who is a kosher aid? So this is unfortunately like a more complicated question, right? So classically, what do you have to be what makes you an invalid aid? Let's start with that. What makes somebody an invalid aid?
They keep Shabbat.
They do what?
They don't keep Shabbat.
They don't keep Shabbat. Is that the only level of sin that invalidates somebody as an aid?
Also, like more easier sins that like they have a statue of being an aid on a person that he's not actually Shomer Torah mitzvot, like for example Megalech Betar or Mesachek B'Kubiya.
Right. So there are psulei deraisa and there are psulei derabanan. Right. Psulei deraisa we often associate with being Shomer Shabbos, but that's actually not like, if you look at the Shulchan Aruch and Choshen Mishpat, right? You're a psulei le'edus deraisa if you publicly violated deraisa iser, right? Any deraisa iser is enough to make you pasul le'edut. For example, if you're a Kohen who's married to a Grusha, even if you're from in every detail of halacha other than that, you are pasul le'edus because you are you're violating an iser lav. So while we often associate just with Shabbos, it's actually much bigger than that. There is a question about whether or not the person has to be declared an invalid aid by having been declared so by a Beit Din. Again, traditionally, yes, in practicality, no. If we know public supplicants publicly violating Isurim, then that's probably sufficient to say they don't count as an aid. We tend to use the shorthand of them. Are they're Shomer Shabbos or not? And that I think is generally works. I mean, this may be a problem for you if you're working in communities that are sort of on the fringe of Orthodoxy, mostly because, again, like you have to then raise this question about people's observance and what their expectations or thoughts of these things might be different from what you think is necessary. I will say that there are a whole host of tshuvot from poskim here in Israel making the argument that chilonim can be counted as aidim, which is weird to me because from like the whole perspective, it's like, if you're not Shomer Shabbos, it's like goodbye. But here, and that's a good thing because like we solve albunas like problems like that all the time. But in Israel, there's a move, like it's an ironic thing because it's an inclusive move, right? We want to be religiously inclusive to allow for Chilonim to be Eidim, but in reality, it actually makes weddings much more complicated from a halachic perspective. So there's argument to incorporate people as Eidim who are not Shomer Shabbos. I personally wouldn't be comfortable with it. Outside of Israel, it's really never done. Even in Israel, I'm not sure how much it's done. So it's just something, to keep in mind. Again, you don't have to ask them in like a third degree, are they, to what extent they keep mitzvahs, but, asking, just tell the couple, they have to, whoever it is, it has to be Shomer Shabbos. The other major factor, again, you're not going to suss out like whether this person has like convictions for like XYZ and whether that might invalidate them as an aide. I did do a wedding once where after the fact, I found out like one of the people, it wasn't an aide, but somebody very close to the family, like was convicted of like fraud and was in federal prison. And this stuff happens a lot and people can easily be invalidated for this. So it's tricky. But again, the Shomer Shabbos question is usually more or less sufficient. And I didn't bring the list, but there's a whole list, obviously, of Eidim are related to each other. All the different levels of relationships can invalidate them. It's easy just to say they cannot be related to each other or the Chatzan and Kala and leave it at that. And if they want to have a third cousin do it, that they may be able to do it, but it's usually easier just to tell the couple, like they just can't be related, Eidim can't be related to each other or to you, and leave it at that. And if they ask, then you can look up and you can determine whether like a second cousin once removed is, on the mother's side can be an aid or not. Rav Landis, you want to add anything about like Eidus and just whether Shomer Shabbos is sufficient or whether you want to say anything else? You're muted. I'm sorry. You're muted. We can't hear you.
The topic is an Orthodox standard, and an Orthodox standard that's the stand, and it does work. It does work. It does work.
Sorry, what does work?
The argument I have today, it says, are Chilonim honest people? I think so. Are they committed to the system of halacha? No, that's why you're taking them seriously. So that's the argument against it. I have nothing to add right now.
Right. Okay. All right. So moving beyond Eidim, Ketubah. So
do you ever get into a question of like Hashudim ala Arayot?
You don't ask those questions to be able to get there. It's like you're not going to start asking, the level of some of that stuff.
If you know, say, look, we don't have a person being aid at the wedding if the person plays around. That's it. I can't determine it. You can't determine it. Let's just make it easy for everyone. Look, down the line, we're talking.
In other words, you can tell the Chatan and the Kala when they're choosing the Eidim, be sure about this point, and then leave it to them to know. If they know, then they know.
I wouldn't even bring it up with them, to be honest. Like, it just opens up like Pandora's box. Like, just ask if they're Shomer Shabbos and leave it at that. It's like, it's impossible. These things, there's many reasons somebody could be invalidated, and we can get very like messy with this. I just think once you start going down this road, it becomes very complicated quickly. Ketubah. So this is like a whole nother complicated issue, right? Like, you need to make sure the ketubah text is done properly, which usually means making sure the ketubah text is filled out beforehand. You really don't want to be in a position of like showing up at the wedding having never seen the ketubah text and then suddenly like filling it in or anything like that. So again, and even what happens, even if the couple like thinks they're just doing it right, they may buy the wrong ketubah. Like, you show up there and it's like, well, wait a second, this isn't the right ketubah. So it's important to tell the couple that they need a traditional or whatever ketubah text you're going to use. And that may mean you sending a copy to them ahead of time. It may require you to tell them, or whoever the calligrapher is, what the specific text needs to be in the ketubah, like filling in the blanks. I didn't bring it, but if you're going to do a wedding, you should have a madriach, right? There's several of them. The RCA madriach is like the standard that I used for many years. And there's a couple of pages in the RCA madriach where it walks you through how to fill out a ketubah. And I used it like, I don't know, all the time. And basically it just, every blank in the ketubah, it has a number and it gives you all the options that you would fill in potentially for that. So it makes it very easy to use, but this all has to be done ahead of time. There is this custom of filling in the kuf in the at the end of the ketubah where it says v'kanina. Don't like where you fill in the kuf afterwards, or don't do that. Just fill it in beforehand so you don't run the risk of the ketubah being signed without that having been filled in, because it actually is a major problem. Like the shtar doesn't work without the kuf filled in because it doesn't say what it's supposed to say at the end. So yeah, fill the kuf in for kanina. There also is questions about dating when if the ketubah is being done, if the wedding's being done like just after shkia or something like that, and the ketubah is being done beforehand, so the ketubah theoretically would be done on one day, and then the wedding would be on the next day. Generally, a shtar mukdam is pasul, so you're usually better off post-dating, making sure that the ketubah is a little bit later. Meaning if it has to be a day, you have to choose the day, you choose the later day and not the earlier day. But again, it's just something to be aware of. And it gets complicated again, like if you're doing it bin hashmasha or after bin hashmasha, like we're not going to get into this, but these are the kinds of things that are covered in Nisuin Kehilchatam. Gary, you had a question?
Yeah, sorry, just realized that on my ketubah that we had a problem like that because I think the rabbi assumed that it was going to be the next day halachically, like past Shkia, and actually it determined it was right before Shkia, so he had to put the bottom naflat ta'ut and explain it. But I wasn't aware of this situation, so it might be interesting if the ketubah is pasul on that basis.
Yeah, I mean it's why you're always better to post date, because the worst thing that happens when they're post dating is that the issue is being married without a ketubah. Right. So, but it's really only an issue about them living together. So they're not actually going to be together without a ketubah until like after the wedding. So in that sense, like you're always better post dating because it's going to avoid a lot of these issues. One other thing. Okay. What language that's in the ketubah, right? Not everybody wants betula. You're not sure that the kala is a betula. So the basic rule is that either she's not a betula, the chassan can give her matayim zuz. As long as he knows that she's not a betula. He can also you can also skip betula. I put here, and you can replace it with some options. But just know if you take out betula or betulta, then people are going to question, was this a second marriage or not? There's a whole host of other things that can come up with the ketubah. Again, like the most important thing is it's the standard ketubah text. And at the bottom, it has, Ne'um and Aid, and those two lines, one underneath the other. Once your ketubah stops looking like that, because you can have decorations if they're like on the outside, but if you have things on the inside, or there are lines in weird, like not just like straight down, you have problems. And so if you reach that point, like, you need to either look it up, or you need to be able to tell them, like, this is the standard of what it should, there's a standard of what it should look like, and that's what it should look like. Joel?
It just, with your permission, Rav Zach, I haven't done nearly as many weddings as you have, but a lot of, especially American weddings, love to use calligraphers and artists, as you mentioned. I found that being in touch with them directly is very helpful, and to have them send you like their preprint and so forth, so that you can flag that stuff before they get to the expensive work, and all of a sudden it's the best possible.
Absolutely. And you want them filling it in for you. You don't want to be doing it. I'm not a calligrapher. I have bad handwriting. I always feel guilty like filling in these fancy ketubahs, like that are going to go live on somebody's wall forever, and I'm like have terrible handwriting. So yeah, you want to avoid as much of that beforehand so that you can have it taken care of by professionals. And it's so much easier if the ketubah is done by the calligrapher the right way. Look, it's a problem because even then you have to go look at it again, like even if you give them all the proper text. And look, if you send text, I'm going to make this point here. You have to check the text ahead of time. I have a wonderful situation where I was doing a bar mitzvah for a Russian family in my shul, and we had the Haredi Kiruv organization who was like helping do the bar mitzvah. So the Haredi rabbis were at my shul for the bar mitzvah, and I had to find like last minute a Russian transliteration of the Hebrew for the father, so he could like recite the Aliyah, bracha for the Aliyah. And I looked very quickly, and what I found was a Russian transliteration, what I thought was a Russian transliteration for the bracha, but I didn't really read it. And I got a call from one of the Haredi rabbis, right before the bar mitzvah, like deeply concerned, because it turns out like what I had actually given this father was it was a Russian transliteration from either a Reform or Reconstructionist like liturgy of some kind. because it literally changed the nusach of the bracha. Again, so the classic nusach of the bracha for the aliyah is like about Jewish, exclusiveness, right? Right, that we are the only unique people that God Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Amim. Right, so they changed that. So for the Haredi rabbis, I was already like, somewhat on the fringe for being this more liberal Orthodox rabbi in the community. And when they saw that I'd given this father like this change bracha, like they literally had a heart attack. They're like, I think they thought they were going to show up at my shul and there was like a Avodah Zarah going on. So I only bring that up because like in the pressure of like, and this will come up with other things too at the wedding. Like you want to give brachas out, like, versions of the Shever brachas or versions of like Harat Mekudesh, whatever. Like you need to read these things before you send them, because it's very easy to pull stuff off the internet and not realize it's the right thing. So just like whether it's the ketubah, any aspect you're giving to people, check it twice to make sure they're getting the right version of what they need. I see Nachum and Raphael.
Yeah, I have two questions. One is, just to clarify, you're saying that you're actually going to write Betula Betulta even if she isn't, because as long as the Chatan is aware of that.
Yes. Oops.
And the other point is, do you get involved with the names? Like, do you write the name according to the way the person's used to writing it, or do you go like the Shulchan Aruch says, like Binyamin with no yuds and things like that?
No, this isn't a get. Like we just do it however they say.
However they do.
I mean, unless it's like clear that they're that they don't know what they're doing, and then you could talk about it with them. Like, oh, it might be this, it might be that. Is there a way to check? But like we generally follow.
Or they may not even know how they write their name in Hebrew.
Right. So it's not that you can't, like you should have that conversation if you have questions. I'm just saying, like when push comes to shove, though, it's not a get, and we don't need to be super precise about the spelling of names. I'll point out that technically you don't even need to include the parent's name. So why is that? So the star, what matters on the star is that you can identify who the people are, right? That's what matters. So the Shulchan Aruch and some of the Achronim actually point out that, like, if the names are on there in a way that enables you to identify them, even if it's not Ploni ben Ploni in the traditional fashion, that would actually be sufficient. So even if it just said, like on my ketubah, like Zachary Truboff, even if it just said it like in English, but that actually might be more than sufficient, is because it would still, the ketubah would still have the necessary identifying information to be able to determine who I am. And that's what matters with the shtar in this context. So the point is ultimately less about, any precise spelling or even just like whether the names are 100% correct, and more so that they can identify through the ketubah who the people are. Raphael?
Yeah, first of all, sorry for the noise from the washing machine, but like my question is more of an Israeli question, because like here in Israel, you have a whole concept. It's more common, the concept of Cheder Yichud. So you spoke about the problem with living with someone without a ketubah, and so like you can fix this during the wedding. It's not a problem, but like here you have this whole thing that the wedding is supposed to go somewhere. Like people are actually waiting to milave the Chassan Kala to the Cheder Yichud. So is there actually a problem that they will be in Yichud before the ketubah be fixed?
I'm not. If you want to look more into the sugya, you can. But in terms of, it's a bigger. It's the.
We will discuss this. We will discuss this next week.
Right. It's the easiest solution. I'm just telling you, is to post it. And again, a lot of it depends on the time frame here. Obviously, you need to figure some of this stuff out. But let's keep putting in mind, like, you need to, the goal is to try to, and you don't always know how long things are going to take. Meaning, like, even in the moment, you don't know. So you can be signed the ketubah 10 minutes before Shkia, and then you have to ask yourself, well, wait a second, when would they be getting to Cheder Yichud? Is that the post date? Is that the next day or not? When says, is it Bein Hashmashot? I mean, you have to open up all these questions. But I'm just telling you, usually the simplest answer is going to be that you're going to post date it. That's all I'm saying. But again, like, and you can try to figure this out. I would always ask, like, when is the chuppah scheduled? Look at the time of the chuppah, and you double check shkia, and you think about these things. But again, it's not, even just because that's when it's scheduled doesn't mean that's exactly how it's going to happen. So it really depends. There's more to say about the ketubah, but again, as long as it's standard, you avoid most of the problems. Aaron?
Sorry, this was a question on the ADIM, especially, I guess this is a little less relevant now with COVID, but let's say someone is trying to minimize the number of attendees at the wedding. B'di'evad, you ever have a situation either where you just have the same ADM for all of these different pieces, or even where you're asked to serve as one of the ADM and only have one other aide for all of
Yeah,
the
I mean, that's totally what you can do. And traditionally, that was what was done when rabbis were doing non-frum weddings, is they got one other aide, and it was the rabbi and the aide, and they did everything. I mean, that's that was the standard. It certainly makes things easier, to be honest, because the less people you have involved, the less moving parts you have. So, like, in that sense, like, if you can get away with that, gesundheit hate, like, it's a good thing. All right, prenuptial agreements. Every wedding you do has to have a halachic prenuptial agreements to avoid problems of igun. There are multiple versions here in Israel. In America, it is really just the RCA prenup. Both in Israel and America, they work by adding a chiyuv mezonot on potentially the husband, but also both sides for every day that the two are not living together, meaning it doesn't punish the parties, but it says as long as they're living together, the husband and the wife potentially, and they have yet to give a get, the husband and the wife potentially owe each other a financial amount each day. So these should be done before the wedding, as opposed to during on the wedding. I actually did a wedding with Rav Landis where we had to do it, I think, during the wedding. It just becomes impossible. Like, there's so many details here. Prenuptial agreements, especially in America, have to be notarized. I think they do in Israel as well. You have to, again, it's a legal document. It's complicated. So, like, it's kind of thing lawyers potentially need to be involved. You just don't want to save this for the wedding. So you do it make sure it's done ahead of time, and you have to do it. And so you got to read it. It's not like it's not an impossible document, but you got to spend a little bit of time with it, like any legal document, to understand what's going on and where it has to be signed and who has to witness and who has to notarize. So, like, take the time on that. It's very important. The RCA prenup could have non-Jewish witnesses. So I think, at least in some of the weddings I did, like, it was an opportunity to, like, honor non-Jewish friends. So it was like, I don't know if that's the thing they want to be honored for, but it was fun. It was cute for them. Like, they just felt like they got to be involved in some weird Jewish thing they're never going to understand anyway. So yeah, you got to do prenups, and you got to know what's involved in them. And you cannot do a wedding without, you just can't without a prenup. Like, don't. Like, I can't emphasize that enough. And if the couple doesn't want it, like, you need to be willing to, to walk away. And we didn't, I guess it was sort of from last time. There is, like, ways to do Kedushin al Tanai. There's the tripartite agreements. Like, there are documented ways of doing that stuff. If the couple wants that, you can certainly explore that. You can talk. I'm happy to be in touch with me, and I can explain to you what's involved in those things. So just be aware those are options too. Civil marriage. And again, we're not even, we'll do civil marriage, I guess. So you should not be doing a wedding, a halachic wedding, if there's not going to be a civil marriage. Well, it may not be illegal to do that, to do a religious marriage without a civil marriage in all states. It certainly is in some. And the only reason people want to do a religious marriage without a civil marriage is to avoid tax and financial issues that are usually trying to, get around things. So what that means, anywhere you do a wedding, you have to know you are civilly marrying the couple, which means you have to, like, figure out what's involved in that. And every state is different, which means every time you do a wedding in a different state, you have to figure out what's involved in being the one who officiates the civil marriage. It can mean registering with the state ahead of time, which can also take time. Doesn't mean you can always do it the day before. There's civil marriage documents that have to get signed as maybe before and even during or after the wedding. So again, like, if you haven't figured out yet, like, weddings are complicated. We've now got 3 levels of, like, legal documents between the ketubah, the prenup, and the civil marriage. And again, like, it's so easy to forget some of this stuff. So this is where it does get, a bit complicated. Like I said, you have to figure it out beforehand. It's just another thing you're gonna have to spend some time on.
Part of figuring it out is trying to be in contact with an old time rabbi who has, who does it all the time. That he or she
Right.
does it all the time, and they know what the deal is.
Yes. No, that certainly helps. But again, even with civil marriage stuff, like, it depends on the state, and, like, and oftentimes, like, the old time rabbi, like, did it so long ago that it's changed like 15 times since, and they don't even know what's going on. So it is just, like, endlessly complicated. In general, I will say, look, you should always have people you speak to when you have questions. And if you're doing a wedding for the first time, it probably makes sense to review the details of it with somebody beforehand, another rabbi, who you can just make sure you're not, like, missing anything. Like, you've covered it all. Look, with Israel, I mean, again, like you can do marriages are done outside the Rabbanut. So like, I don't know if some of you would see yourselves doing that. I personally have no problem with that at all. I mean, I'm not sure like any marriage should be done to the Rabbanut in this country, but it does make things more complicated. Chupot does weddings outside the Rabbanut. Rabbi Aaron Leibowitz, I think, is sort of heading it now. And so that's like a whole nother option. If you want to be involved in that, I think they're always looking for new people. So if Israelis say like, I want to help marry Chilonim outside of the Rabbanut, like you should definitely consider being in touch with Chupot.
But how does that work? How do you then have it registered? In other words, you don't ever register?
There's a civil marriage done in Cyprus or whatever.
In other words, you let, and they have to handle that. You're not going to handle that for them.
Well, you're not flying to Cyprus with them. I mean, unless they're flying for
all the legalities of it, they have to deal with.
Right, you're acting, if you do a wedding outside the Rabbanut, you're acting illegally. Like, I want to be clear about that. But there is compelling moral reasons why you should do that potentially. So without opening all that up right now, I'm just saying that's an option. It's something to be aware of. I don't know, Rav Lenny, maybe I don't want to overstep, but like
there's a
do
good
you have a problem
organization.
with people doing marriages outside the Rabbanut in this country?
Yeah. Yes. The problem is you could. It may come to a point in this country that you could be arrested for it.
Yes.
It may happen. In other words, we're headed towards not less. If we were headed towards lesser conflict, I hope there'll be greater conflict, and and the system may fall, and there'll be another system. But even it's not necessarily a bracha. In the meantime, for those who are halachic, and you can trust chupot.
Yeah.
And
if
talk to
you want to be, they're always looking for new people. Like I was asked before to do.
We have many of our musmachim are doing weddings with chupot. A whole number of my musmachim, our musmachim, are doing it.
Right. No, it's a mitzvah. I think what they're doing is a real mitzvah. So I think that's a worthwhile endeavor, and that formalizes this process a bit, right? Like so, a lot of what we would talk about here gets streamlined through them in ways that I think are important and helpful. Let me keep going about what to bring to the wedding. So I'm sure I forgot things, but this was like the list that I was looking through some of my stuff. So again, you want to have multiple nice pens. There's always writing involved in the wedding. You have to decide whether you want to bring a sudar or not to do the kinyan for the ketubah. You don't have to use a sudar. You can use one of your pens. I don't know. Some rabbis like to have a sudar or not. I mean, it's really up to you whether you have, or some other object that you want to use for it. You should always come to the wedding with an extra ketubah and tanayim. I had like these pocket foldable ones I used to bring. I never had to use it, thank God, but you should always have the backup with you. Always make sure to bring your madriach that like just has it, has the outline. And then what do you do when you get to the wedding? Right. So like when you show up, there's like certain things you just need to do right away to make sure like this thing doesn't like fall apart. So I'll just go through them quickly and then we'll open up to questions. Number one, find out who is in charge of the venue. Ideally, find out ahead of time, like who's the maitre d', who's the one in charge. But even when you know who they are, once you have a name,
don't trust the wedding planner to know anything.
Yeah, the wedding planners often are not the ones running the show at the wedding. It's usually the people. It's the people in the facility, meaning like whoever they're usually the ones most in charge. So you got to find out who that is, and ideally ahead of time. But if not even ahead of time, it should be the first question you ask is like, who's in charge, and then you go talk to them just to make sure like the basics are covered and that the timetable is on, everybody's on agreement, and that they know who you are and you know who they are, and that you can find each other if there are issues. That's number one. Number two, I would always go right to the chuppah to make sure the cups and the wine are there, and also the glass if it's being broken. I didn't mention it before. Are you bringing the glass? Are they bringing the glass? The less you have to bring, the better. So if you can get them to bring it, the breakable glass, then just do that. You want to find and check the yichud room beforehand just to make sure it's there and that it's a proper yichud room, that it doesn't have another door with that's open or like giant windows or things like that to the outside. Again, just you want to know where things are, like you need to know the lay of the land. You want to make sure you know where the ketubah is, and you want to make sure you know where the ring is, and who has it. And then the last part in terms of like the sort of just when you get there, is you've got to define the ADIM. And there is some like minimal vetting of the ADIM that you should probably do. Again, if there's like 6 different ADIM or 8 ADIM, like you may not be able to do this, but at least for, 8-day Kedushin, well, you really want to do this for 8-day Kedushin. For number one, you should let them know they shouldn't drink. The chassan also shouldn't be drinking, or the kala before the wedding. You should ask them again if they're Shomer Shabbos. Some rabbis have the custom of asking them if they should do tshuva. That probably doesn't really work halachically. So like if they're not kosher edim, I don't do that, but that's certainly something that people do. If they're signing on the ketubah, it's usually helpful to have them like practice their signature once on a piece of paper. So like A, that they know like how to write their name, and B, like it just gives them a sense like to like what it's going to do, especially because if the ketubah itself doesn't have a lot of room, it's good to help them just do it once right beforehand. So that they're and obviously if they're a Kohen or Levi, usually they go first on the ketubah. Those are the I would also ask them if they're obviously related to the other 8 or to the chassan and kala. Those are the the basic steps. Like when I get there, just these things need to be done. I know there was questions or hands. Yeah.
Yeah, as I recall, I think I signed a ketubah at some point, and they told me like, this is not a signature like you would sign normally. It's a signature that should be legible, Dafka.
Yes. Yes, it should be. That's why, again, you want them to practice it just once on a piece of paper to make sure that it can be ideally legible. Nachum?
Yeah, well, one question I have is Tanaim. Do you always do Tanaim?
No, I unless they want it, I don't do it.
You don't do it. Okay. And the signature, do you ever have them write in English?
No. I mean, again, there are ketubas that like have all sorts of like things for stuff like that, and that's not generally a problem, to be honest. But I typically, if I'm using a standard ketubah, then it's just a traditional, Ploni ben Ploni, and that's it.
And do you write the last name?
No, they don't need to. I mean, they can, but they don't need to.
I always have them do that. And in Israel, I have them put down their Teudat Zehut. And why do I do that? And I'll tell you one thing. It always goes through the rabbinate very fast when I have that done. They figure I'm such a yekka for that, so, but that's a benefit.
Yep, I agree. Other questions? Okay, so let's keep going. And this is probably like the most important thing I can like show you. So, and I learned this from another, I don't know if she's even a musmach, I don't know what the word is. Yafa Epstein, when I remember before I did my first wedding. So I don't know why, I remember why I was talking to Yafa about this, because we weren't like living in the same place at the time. But she put together I don't know if she recommended it. I don't even remember what the story was, but from her, I learned something extraordinarily important, that it is beyond helpful to have a detailed outline of the wedding beforehand. And what I mean by this, and we're going to go through a sample one that I did, is that every step of it is basically written down, like what you're going to do and what you're going to say and who's going to be involved. And I have found this like extraordinarily helpful, because there are literally like 100 steps to a wedding, and I have a pretty good memory and I'm pretty good on my feet. But even still, it is so easy to forget things. It is so easy to forget things. And I have found that like having this, and I carried this like around with me, like with my madrich throughout the whole time at the wedding, it just ensures that I never have to like worry, because I know exactly what's coming. I can just look down at the piece of paper and be reminded, okay, like what exactly comes next. So I cannot recommend enough that you should have like a detailed outline of your outline of your wedding. Hadassah, or the one here? Sorry, I saw Asher's comment. The one in Beit Shemesh? Yeah. So I'll go through.
No, sorry, the one in Modi'in.
The one in Modi'in. So this is like super helpful, and I incorporated on this just like any like words of anything that I'm saying as well. So it's just here, and it always served me extremely well. I don't think I ever did a wedding unless I was doing a wedding where I really wasn't doing most of this stuff. Otherwise, I always used it, and I always found it extraordinarily, helpful. So I want to walk through. This is one of the weddings I did. Jenny and Dave, Jenny Dave's wedding. And it takes you through all the different pieces of this, and we'll try to then focus on some of the halachic specifics here. So this wedding, I actually did do Tanayim. And again, like you have to figure out who's got to be there for Tanayim. So you got to get all the relevant people there, right? In this case, it's the fathers, the mothers, the witnesses, whoever's reading the Tanayim. So the fathers were there to make a kinyan on the Tanayim. And again, and there's some explanatory material here. The witnesses then had to sign the Tanayim. I guess I did sign it. I don't remember that. So Rabbi Grandstein was the longtime rabbi at, I didn't even spell his name right here, at Green Road Synagogue in Cleveland, the big non-Orthodox shul, where I was the rabbi of one of the other non-Orthodox shuls. And Rabbi Grandstein is one of these, as Rabbi Landy said, eloquently, old timers. He was there for 36 years. Thank God he was able to make Aliyah a few years ago. Very big Talmud Chacham, really, really, really smart, intellectual guy. And he actually did, I remember at this wedding, he did something very interesting, because I remember I was going through this, like the ritual of it, just like running through it, because there's so much to do. This is a fancy wedding at a big expensive hotel in downtown Cleveland. And I remember like handing him the Tanakh, and like, okay, Rabbi Grandstein, just sign. And he immediately looked at me and he said, Zach, like you never sign anything before you read it. And I remember almost being embarrassed a little bit, because it was like something that was like so obvious to me that it like had never occurred to me, because again, like we're just so used to just running through all this stuff, going through the motions. But he sat there and he read the Tanayim. And he's correct. You should never sign anything before you read it, whether it's a halachic document or any kind of document in life. So I to this day, that like always sticks in my mind, and it's a very important lesson that if you're going to be signing something, you should read it beforehand. And don't be surprised if other people, and you maybe should encourage people to read it beforehand amongst the many documents that you're going to be giving them. Fine. So then you read the Tanayim. You don't have to read the Tanayim, but whatever. And then the mothers break the plate. You ideally want to find a plate that's more breakable. Usually people wrap it up in like a thing and they break it. And usually you want to break it on the back of a chair. I have been at weddings where the mothers like got stabbed with the broken shards of the plates and then like needed to have stitches. Like it's a stupid thing. But we even do this, but we do this. So just be aware.
At my wedding, the plate didn't break until like the 7th try.
I know it's just such a stupid thing to be wasting.
The mothers were fine, but the plate was indestructible.
Right. So again, you usually have to figure this out, like how much time is it going to take for all these things. So if the chuppah is at 7 o'clock, like when are you starting this stuff? Usually like around, 6:15, you're starting this stuff to like making sure it's all done and you get over to the chuppah in a reasonable time.
Do you ever do a breaking of plate without tonight? Just as a ceremony? Just as
is there a reason we would do that?
Yes, like you wrote, to remind us
just
that
for the
the
superstition.
temple has been destroyed.
I made that up just because you want people to like go with it. Like I don't remember.
The mother and the father.
That's not the reason we do it.
For example, the mothers want to do this breaking of the plate because they saw other people do it, but the Chatan and Kala don't want to do tonight.
I don't know. I mean, I avoid Tanayim. It's just like a stupid thing we do. Like it doesn't mean anything. Like I don't know what to say. I mean, if you can incorporate all sorts of rituals here. So if they want to break plates, I guess let them look. This is like a Bal Tashchit question. Like, why are we just breaking things? Like, I don't know. Like, I'm not saying you can't do these things. I'm just saying, like, I personally am not super invested.
There have been Jews who have done it.
Yeah, sure. There've been Jews that have done a lot of things.
Yeah,
Right.
I've read the Tanakh and broken apart. Okay.
If I'm gonna break a plate as a rabbi, I'd prefer it to be over a congregate's head when I like lose my temper and not just like at some
Have
stuff.
strength, Rabbi. Go on.
If you're gonna go in style. Tish. So obviously, usually have what's called the Chassan's Tish. In this particular Tish, I must have said something. And I think I incorporated. I've recommended this, that it's an opportunity for like the fathers to like share some words of bracha, like with the chassan. They don't have to be extravagant or long, but just they share some words, like something, some hopes or nice things that you would like to, share with the chassan at the wedding. Sometimes the chassan gives it. I think I gave it to my Tish, whatever. This is like nobody's paying attention at the Tish. It's always tishes are always kind of weird and awkward because like nobody knows like how long they're going to last or like what's happening. But you just go and you do your thing, and again, let it be informal. Let people just feel comfortable. Whatever, however you want to do it. Be ready to sing, right? Like that's why I even wrote there, like just to remind myself. And then obviously you want to explain what's going to come next, which is the bedekin. And you have this usually timed out. I don't think I wrote the times on here, but at a certain point, you're going to take the chatan over to the kala for the bedekin. You need to know where that is, and you're going to dance him over. And is everybody going to help dance him over? Whatever. So in this case, we were taking Jenny where Jenny was seated, and again, this is a lot of this is like just filler. Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer does say the chatan de Melech. Usually, though, the tradition is that we just rise for the we rise for the kala. We don't really say rise for the chassan, but yeah, like there's the midrash ideas of the shosh vanim to the chassan, right, that accompany him. So that must be why I wrote that here. And then we get to the bedekin itself. The chassan has to veil the kala. So like this should be done carefully because it's very easy to rip that thing off without realizing it. At my wedding, I ripped my wife's off. And that's like, it takes a lot of time and energy to get that thing in the hair and the hair right. So like, yeah, pulling it out is not a good idea. There is this great picture of like my great aunts and my wife's grandmother, like trying to put the thing back in afterwards. But like, yeah, just carefully, just like do the light veiling. Again, sometimes they will also, like in this wedding, that she gave him a talit at that point. So you had to make a bracha and put on the talit. Sometimes they do that under the chuppah. Again, there's like endless pieces to like the way these things can, yeah, like I said, it gets endless with this stuff. In this case, the father was going to bless the bride, give a special bracha. Sometimes some rabbis will sometimes do like a birkas kohanim. Like I don't do that, but some do. My Rabbi Weiss from Chavve, where I was at, he has like a whole thing like singing that he does with the bedekin that's very beautiful. So I realize as we're going through these things, the Tanayim Tish bedekin, any thoughts, suggestions, things?
First of all, Kala can have her own tish.
Yes, certainly.
Problem with tish is it shouldn't go too long.
No,
and you can't have too many people speaking. It runs into. That's my practical advice. You have to be careful. You have to be careful about that, and there has to be some coordination between the two camps, where the chassan is, where the kala is. Also, when the general practice, and it is good practice, that if you have someone from both sides of the family, the father of the chassan takes him with the right hand. The father's not available, a brother, an uncle, then or a good friend, and then you have the same thing with the same thing on the left side, the father of the bride or an uncle or whatever, and they take him, and it helps the simcha as well.
Yep. Okay. So bedekin. So right from the bedekin, everybody goes to the chuppah. Right. So again, in this whole the Tanayim Tish bedekin, getting ready to the chuppah, there's a lot, and you want to try to keep things simple and keep things moving. So when we go to the chuppah, usually sometimes you have to be in the procession, and if you are, you usually go down first. It's much better if you could just like be there waiting and you don't have to be in the procession. So like if you're there waiting, then you may start the procession. So I have some words of introduction, fill 2 cups during the procession. Dave comes first. When he arrives at the chuppah, I must have sang Miadir, or somebody sang Miadir, I don't remember. Then the bride comes, and when she comes, or usually at the end of the wedding party, she circles 7 times counterclockwise, and she ends on the groom's right. And I don't remember if I sung Livan Siach, but again, she doesn't have to circle. Sometimes some only have the custom of circling 3 times. Again, if you want to have him circle, if you want to have them do-si-do and circle each other, you're welcome to do that, I suppose. I will say this, 7 times around is you have to count. And I learned this from the rabbi who married me. It helps to put a finger down. Like, so as you're doing it, you can make sure, 1, 2, and so you remember and that they remember. So that's something that I still do because it's very easy to lose track. I've lost track. Right, ladies, you must have lost track at weddings, right? Like how many times?
Yeah.
It's
Listen,
terribly embarrassing
I
for
used
you
to
as the
put
rabbi, even though
good
nobody
price-
cares.
I have to put people care. This is one thing they care. This is one thing they know about is that you couldn't count it right. So, but I should say it now. One way of handling all this is this written process, which I from our student Yafa, and that what I do, and I still do. Once when I forgot almost something very important from the chuppah, like a kinyan I had forgotten, is actually I always have a spotter with me who knows somehow what I'm missing. And
Right.
they'll remind me.
Right.
Always do that.
So
Don't
right.
trust myself. Heck, I give the share on this. But nonetheless, you can forget.
Oh, totally. I mean, you will forget. That's why you have to have like some way to.
Yeah, so I think the written stuff makes a lot
I mean,
of sense.
I've seen like big time, Gedolim forget things. Like it happens at weddings. Like it happens. Like it's going to
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
Now, if you notice, I saved the ketubah. I didn't have the ketubah during the chassan's dish. That's because usually when I do weddings, I usually do a double ring, and we do the ketubah between kedushin and nesuin. So just in this outline, that's where it is. So we'll get there, in a moment. But this is just the beginning. So I gave some introductory remarks, but then they also had somebody come up and give a Devar Torah. And that's why you need these lists, because you often have so many different people involved. Like there's no way to track, all of it. You're not going to remember. Okay, now we get the intro to Kedushin, right? So Kedushin, Ketubah, and Nesuin, right? So we got to go through all this. So first part of the wedding is Kedushin, right? At this point, you call up the two witnesses, and usually by name. There are two blessings that you make, right, as part of Birchas Erusin. The rabbi makes these, and then they are given to. In this case, I gave it to.
What do you do about Minui Aiden?
So I'm going to come back. I'll come back to that.
Oh, you get there? Okay.
Yeah, right now I just wanted them up there at the moment. Like they're not like I tell the witnesses to come down before I do Birchas Erusin, I guess is what I did, just so they're there and I didn't have to worry about it. So number one, like you have to I guess I had the practice of trying to drip out some of it onto my hand, because there's a concern about being a bracha levatala if you're making the brei pri hagafen and not drinking from it. You don't have to do that. I think like Rabbi there are a couple of them talk about it. That's number one. I will say that my Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Dov Linzer, has a tshuva he wrote about women saying Birchat Erusin. I don't know. I sent it to Rabbi Danzig. I don't know if he shared it with you. I personally find his arguments convincing in that there are a whole bunch of achronim who are very clear that Birchas Erusin is a Birchas Shevach, which means, and that the woman could do it. There's actually achronim who say, like, yes, theoretically the woman could do it. So what that means is that you could have a female Masar Kedushin who does this without really, that being an issue. I don't know how commonly done it is, certainly not in the Orthodox world, but I'm just saying halachically it's important to know that that's an option. I think it's happening more and more often these days, at least in some of the more liberal ends of the Orthodox world. Okay, now we get to the witnesses. So in this case, in terms of Yichud Eidim, Minui Eidim, I asked Dave, who are your witnesses? Are these your only witnesses? So that's him. Again, without getting, witnesses don't have to be appointed by the Chatan, right? They actually at all. But you need to be able to sort of designate who the witnesses are to separate them from everybody else. You don't even have to do this, but let's assume you are doing this. So this is the way I did it here. So I asked him, are these your witnesses? I asked him to hold the ring in his right hand. Asked the witnesses, you see that David owns the ring. David gave me the ring. I showed the witnesses. I said, see that it is worth Shava Pruta, of sufficient value to effect betrothal. And then they gave the ring back to Dave in his right hand. The point here is not actually so much that the witnesses know that it's Shava Pruta, that's part of it. It's actually more important that the Kala knows that it's Shava Pruta, because she needs to know what she is receiving. But again, this is just what you go through to establish, all of this. And then again, you ask the Chatan, I had a card. I didn't even mention this. You got to bring the card printout with the bracha. Again, telling him to, have the card, recite the Harat Mikudeshetli, Israel, put it on her right index finger, right? Means just like putting it on this, and then asking the witnesses, did you see the giving of the ring? They don't always see the giving of the ring. And then if so, Mikudeshet, right, you're fine. And that is Kedushin. So again, with Yichud Eidim, again, there's whole debates in the Achron whether you need it, but this probably counts fine for being Miyached Eidim. What it does is that it does two things potentially. It excludes all other witnesses. So particularly, the concern is if you have family members under the chuppah, family members will be part of the kat of edus, and they are puzzled, then you have a problem. So by miyached edim, you exclude them. But what it also does from an aguna perspective, just so you know, is that if your edim happen to be pasul and you don't know it, if you're miyached edim, then other people who are at the chuppah, even if they're kosher edim, don't count. So in the Beit Din world, we like, you want there to be yichud edim, so that if there are puzzle edim, then everybody else is disqualified as well. But again, there's a whole debate about what technically counts as yichud edim in the first place. Did you want to add something, Rav Landis? You're muted.
On your list, where's the Harayat Mekudeshes?
Oh, I have a card with it.
Oh, I see. Okay, fine.
I'm missing. Obviously, I'm missing.
Okay, I just want to know for.
I mean, you can
And
have
the second thing.
You can have them repeated after you, but again, I prefer they just read it off the card.
And the second, I think I would mention just when I got married, so a long time ago. So Cheryl asked beforehand, what is she going to say? Which shocked the heck out of me. And we spent a whole Shabbos at my family's house going through Tanakh. I gave her, a whole bunch of psukim from Shir Shirim and other stuff, but it was too lovey-dovey for her. And I say, basically, what do you want to say? And she said, well, we're getting married. I agreed to it. So I went to Amos Gimel Gimel, Amos 3:3, where it says, Hayechu Shnaim Yachtav Bilti Im Noadu. Well, two people walk together unless they agree. So anyway, she said that under the chuppah after the ring was on that. I had a couple of gedolim under the chuppah, at least 3 gedolim. Two of them kind of smiled. And many of my congregants adopted that, and I was happy. I didn't know they were going to do it, but my daughter did that. My daughter-in-law did it. So I'm just saying there could be a place for that. Amos Gimel Gimel, I'm suggesting it to you as a Nezet Sivoy, but as a Matana.
Right. So in general, there's really no problem if she says something that affirms her acceptance of the ring, right? Because it just makes clear what her das is. So as Rav Landis said, that's fine. I mean, it gets more complicated. You don't really want her speaking before the giving of the ring, if only because you don't want to give the inclination that she is the being Mekadesh him. But again, if it's just a question of her response, that's these. Again, you might, I don't know how egalitarian your weddings are going to be, but obviously the more egalitarian they are, the more complicated it gets from a halachic perspective. Okay, let me keep going. So what I typically do when I was doing weddings was we would do a double ring, but what that means is the ketubah is done between kedushin and nisuin. So the advantage to this, the way this works, is that's minhag Yerushalayim. I mean, not necessarily the double ring, but the ketubah being done between kedushin and nisuin.
Can I ask a question from before? You said sometimes the Edim don't see the giving of the ring. Do you then go and reenact it, or is there, what do you do then?
Yeah. I mean, you can. I mean, yes. I haven't had to do that, but I've seen it happen at weddings. It's. I mean, it might. I mean, yeah. I mean, yes. That's all I can say. The ketubah is done after the between kedushin and nisuin. I think that's better. Even if you're not doing a double ring, I think it's actually nicer on a certain level. Again, you got to call the witnesses. The ketubah
How can you wait? I'm sorry. How can you reenact it? Because if she already received it, then it's hers now.
She hasn't
You'd have
received the ketubah.
No, I'm saying
The
the
ring.
reenacting of the giving of the ring.
How can,
Wasn't that, I thought
um,
because she's,
so,
are you
yeah,
talking about
I mean,
reenacting the giving of the ketubah? It's already, the ring is hers. You'd have to give her something else.
no, not necessarily. I mean, let me back it up a second. All right, so the question becomes at that case, at that point. So I mean, again, you would have to make the argument that if they didn't see it, that she had no intention of accepting it if it wasn't going to be for the purpose of marriage, and without them seeing it, it wasn't for the purpose of marriage. So I don't think it's hard to make the halachic argument that he can give the ring again. I've seen it done. I've never had to do it. I mean, but that would be, I think, the straightforward logic of it. Okay, so I'm moving on to the ketubah. You need your witnesses down. Ketubah is read. When you get to the end is when you basically do the kinyan. So the kinyan for the ketubah is a kinyan hitchayvut. And what that means is that the chatan is accepting upon himself the responsibilities of the ketubah. Tanai baked in, as you've already learned the mission of ketubah, you know, it means that the obligations of the ketubah exist independent of the document. But we still have the document, and we still go through this formal process of the kinyan hitchayvut. If you want this to be the dual ring, then what it means is when that, as it says here, at this time, Jenny will give a ring to Dave. Through his acceptance of the ring, he also accepts upon himself and acquires the obligations of the responsibilities of the ketubah. Right? The kinyan chalifin for the ketubah does not have to be the rabbi giving him something. It can be anybody giving him it, because it's not a kinyan makna, it's a kinyan kona, which means it's the kinyan of the person receiving it. It's not a kinyan of the person giving it over. So that's why it can be done by anybody. And in this case, it can be done by her giving the ring, right? Which is, again, part of why I think this is a nice way to do this is it makes the giving of the ring, of her giving the ring to him, of an act of halachic significance, right? And as opposed to just something that it can be done afterwards, right? Sometimes they'll do it at the end of the chuppah or in yichud, but this actually formalizes it halachically in the context of the wedding.
Could you just walk us through how that is done? Just again, you've said it, but
That's fine. So you are reading the ketubah up until you get to the final kinyan of it, right? Then he does the kinyan, and by her giving him the ring, that's what it says. She gives him you say she's going to give him the ring. That's the kinyan, and then the witnesses sign under the chuppah. He has to make sure that there's like some physical flat surface for the witnesses to sign the ketubah. So that's something else you got to just keep in mind ahead of time.
Why is it necessary? Why is it necessary? What about if the ketubah was signed at the yichud?
You can certainly do it there, and everything I just described here applies. I've never seen the double ring being done at that point. Usually, then the rabbi does the kinyan with the chassan. You give him a pen or a sudar.
Yeah.
You say with this.
No, but I'm going back to the ring, and not do the ring when it's read, even though it's not going to be signed. It was already signed.
So the advantage of right. So then you could just read the ketubah as
your scenario.
Right. So the question is, if you're going to do a second ring under the chuppah, when should it be done? So the advantage of this is that it actually has a halachic place. So you don't have to be concerned about, Moshe has this concern about double rings, and that, if you do the second ring anytime near Kedushin, it puts the whole Kedushin into question. So when a second
By
ring.
the way, David Weiss-Livni expressed the same problem. I mean,
right. So when people the options of doing double ring, as I've seen it, is either doing it like this, or you do it at the end of the chuppah, right? Or you do it, or she gives it in yichud or something like that. Like those are the only things that I've seen.
Okay.
This I just think formalizes it a little bit more, nicely, and it's easy. I mean, you might think, oh, you're doing ketubah under the chuppah, that's adding more. You're really not, because once you're reading the chuppah under the ketubah under the chuppah anyway, all this adds is the witnesses signing. It's really very simple. Okay, from there we go to Nisuin, right? So Shever Brachos. Again, you need to have the whole list ahead of time. So in everybody's name and everybody's, in this case, so what do we do here? We did last part of the Nisuin, right? So the brachas were recited, And in each case, the spouse was reciting the translation. So a couple of things about Sheva Brachas, about women reciting Sheva Brachas. So it's become more and more, halachically acceptable about the idea of women reciting Sheva Brachas. Rav Bigman has a tshuva that he wrote just a couple of years ago where he basically says that women can recite all the Sheva Brachas. That wasn't the case like even 15 years ago. Rav Henkin was still saying, women can't recite Sheva Brachas or shouldn't. And, it's sort of that boundary has sort of been like eroded over time. I can send people material on that if they want. And then I guess the other thing I would say is that there is no hefsek between Sheva Brachas, meaning every bracha is its own, even if they doesn't have the matbeya of a bracha, even if it looks like it's a bracha samucha lechaverta or something like that, or petucha, it doesn't matter. They're all technically independent of each other. So if you have a concern of hefsek, you don't have to be. Like they're all independent. I'll just say that. Other questions about the Sheva Brachas? I thought I saw a hand.
It was me about the brachot being smuchot on 4, 5, and 6. So you answer that.
Yeah, they're not. They look like they are, but they're not. Is what I could. Ramosha is a tshuvan, or Ravaja is a tshuvan, if you want to see that. Brian, don't you, Rabbi Landis? I try to remember because I look at some of these names.
Yeah.
1 second. All right, let me keep going. And then with the conclusion of the chuppah. We usually sing in Mishkachech, put down the glass, break the glass, Mazel Tov, lift up the veil, go down the aisle to the Yichud room. Again,
wait. Lift up the veil. When the veil is lifted for the first set of brachot, leave the veil back and do not replace the veil.
Yeah, you don't have to. I think I put that there so people don't think they have to walk down the aisle with the veil on.
Okay, fine.
I think my wife might have, but to be honest, I don't remember. Again, it's just like one of these little things that you just like if you don't have a heavy veil, you don't think twice about it. But whatever. So I think that's probably why I put it in there. You are then going to Yichud. Again, you have to have your witnesses for Yichud. David, right? So this is when I first met David. He was one of the witnesses. So
okay.
David and Reuben Gottman. I don't know if you know Reuben. I don't. He doesn't live here. So the witnesses need to be ready. You have to check their yichud room if it's empty. Yichud can last anywhere from 3 to 7 minutes. So I think I wrote here 7 minutes, 6 to 7. That's just to keep it simple. And usually I usually want to tell the chassan and the kala just to breathe. And usually you want to make sure they have some food in there because they've usually been fasting, and just to feel they have like a minute or two to kind of gather themselves, because what comes right afterwards is usually
what comes right afterwards?
What was that?
What often comes right afterwards is a monumental amount of time of photographs.
Yeah.
Much better to get as much photographing in, even if the chassan and kala aren't seeing each other, which is a good minute, but to get the two sets of families to do whatever they can do to get most of that photo, so that people don't wait an unusual amount of time for the chassan and kala to show up.
Right.
The battle between the rabbi and the photographer is always a big deal.
Yes, especially around the chuppah and the videographer, and you're like having to navigate around all of them. Look, this stuff gets like messy. This wedding, unfortunately, the chuppah collapsed like 20 minutes before the we were scheduled for chuppah, and it was a massive freestanding chuppah. So I had to be worried, was the ketubah and everything else that was crushed, was it crushed underneath it? Are we going to get it back up in time? This is the kind of ridiculousness that how can easily happen at a wedding. The problem is that nobody's at weddings, the family doesn't actually freak out. But what that means is that they're just in la la land. The chassan, the kala, and their parents are in total la la land at weddings. They're waiting for everybody else to tell them what to do, which unfortunately means is the rabbi, it's you and whoever the person is at the facility who are basically running the show. You don't nobody's telling you you're running the show, but you are effectively, because there's nobody else who's really going to be on top of things. And then we go to the Suda. Does the rabbi need to stay to the end of the meal? So I'll just point out that there, if you partake in the Suda, there's an expectation. I mean, halachically, you have to participate in Sheva Brachas. The other way around that is to not wash, or to wash with the intention of not participating in the meal. But the default halachically is if you're eating in the meal, like you're supposed to stay to the end of the benching and Sheva Brachas. I think we're probably close to running out of time. Yeah. So any other questions on any of this, or just, I guess, open it up to any questions altogether. Usually there's more documents to sign after, like civil marriage documents after the wedding too. So like you have to remember.
Yeah, okay. One of the important things is who takes the ketubah, so it doesn't get lost. That happens more than once.
Yeah.
And who's the responsible party, which is not the chassan and kala, as you said, responsible party to return, and if it's done in full, to return, if it's done here, to return the marriage documents to the civil authority or to the Beit Din. You have to find a lawyer usually.
Yeah. Well, I didn't mention, but the rabbi should be keeping backup copies of the prenup.
Yeah.
And you can also file them with the BDA, Beit Din of America. I mean, it's easy to forget. Like even civil marriage documents, I think I almost forgot once to fill them out and send them, in afterwards. In terms of we didn't even talk about giving the ketubah to the kala and do they have to be Eidei Masira again? Like, I'm not going to worry about. I mean, some people do these things, but you don't really need. It doesn't need to be given to her in any really formal fashion. I mean, you got to make sure that they don't lose track of the ketubah. But I have to be honest, Rav Landis, that's usually where I'm not I give up. I can't. There's so many issues that they need to know to keep the ketubah and not forget about it.
I have stories. I do have to say. So why does someone do this work?
Yeah.
Well, no, I have an answer.
Yeah,
it is a fantastic thrill when it's over. You bring chassan and kala, if you believe in these brachot, nothing like it, and you're actually able to do it. You actually facilitated something.
When you know the couple and you're really able to be present for it, it's a very, very special thing. It's really, really special. Just doesn't happen all the time. So I do want to acknowledge that, and it is worth it. It's complicated, and you should know what you're getting into. That's all. I'm going to send the slides, and I'll try to send some of the other things I mentioned.
I want to thank you very much. Really, a tour de force, and there was it's a roller coaster. I saw people going through all sorts of feelings and all that, but this is just the state of the art, so to speak, within a segment of society, which is a segment that, which in a certain sense could be said based on a classic sense. Okay, again, and you're open for people contacting you. So
I mean, I don't do marriages that much anymore. So I'm not I don't think I'm I mean, I'm happy. I can always be a resource, but I think I don't even know how many rabbis. I mean, you have to be a rabbi of a very large synagogue to be doing marriages all the time. And even then they do it in a very perfunctory way usually. And they have no choice. I mean, it's too much and too many people. So, again, just be aware of what you're getting into and try to make sure you're on top of things. You don't have to be Mashiach, but there's a lot that you need to be aware of. And it may take several before you really feel like you get a handle on it all. Don't assume the first time you go through this is going to be simple and smooth, and that's fine.
I have a question. How did you learn to do it?
I mean, I in my yeshiva we had more extensive classes on it than you did. Rav Landis, I got to do shivush with Rav Landis. That was actually very important for this. Very important. I want to emphasize that. So life cycles in general is always really, really important to do some kind of shimush, funerals, weddings, and bris, you should gerus especially, right? You should have the experience of shimush because it gives you a much better sense of it. And what you should do is you could help them, and you can be part of it too, as Rav Landy said. You're kind of like the spotter, but you can backstage a lot of it with the rabbi. I mean, you can ask questions and like, why'd you do this and what's going on there? That's really, helpful and important. I always highly valued the fact that I had the chance to do that. And we did it, Rav Landy's, it was Aaron Katchen's wedding. So Katchen had like a big fancy wedding, and it was like complicated. And it worked out really well. It worked out really well, but that's exactly why it was such a good experience, because it was like there were so many pieces and we had to figure a lot out. And I remember kind of just like, working on the fly with you to make sure everything was done right.
Yeah. They're very happy. He just was named as director of Camp Mosheva in Canada.
I heard. I was in touch with them.
They're a great couple.
Yes.
So that one works. What can I tell you?
I mean, I hate to say this, this, like the percentage of people I've married who divorced is like, it's higher than I want to admit. It's not because of me, I don't think, but like, a lot of divorces, like, that like you said, when you point out like the happy, successful marriage, and that was like 17 years ago or something like that, it's like, those are the ones worth like, being proud of.
Yeah. Thank you all. There'll be stuff in this wake, and we really appreciate it. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it, Zach. So
no problem. I think
I will end with my part saying of Simchas. We should meet really only in Simchas.
Yes.
Shkoach, thank you very much.